Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how to make hand-built slab strappy handles. So I've got a couple cups over here. I typically like to add my handles when the piece is still like early leather hard. So it's a little stiffer. Obviously it needs to be stiffer than freshly thrown cups, right? So I threw these about an hour and a half ago, and then I let them sit outside for about 10-15 minutes, and they're pretty close to perfect. So they still feel a little soft and wet, right? I can still feel the moisture in them. They're very cold, but they're not trimmed yet. So this is kind of like the weird little, like, you know, medium situation where do you trim it first or you put the handle on first? I think you might want to try trimming your pieces first. You're gonna have to trim them a little on the wet side, okay? Do you know why it's probably better to trim your pieces first before you put a handle on? Any ideas?
It's kind of in the way, I guess.
What's that?
Like it's in the way of like getting around.
Yep, the handle will be in the way, right? So, for instance, let's say this Melissa Mancini mug. You put your handle on your piece, you have the handle that goes all the way to the bottom, right? But you haven't trimmed it yet. You go to trim it, think that handle's spinning really fast, right? Really fast. I can't tell you how many times I've seen students like knock that off, like accidentally, as it's like flying around on the wheel. So it gets in the way. It's also really precarious. Okay, so be very careful of that if you do go that route. Make sure that you don't attach the bottom of your handle like near the bottom where you actually want to trim, obviously, because it'll like, you know, totally be in the way. So that's definitely one thing. I'm just for today, just for this demonstration, I'm going to show you guys how to add it before I trim it. So I do recommend trimming it, but you want to trim them again before it gets a little too stiff. So the handles I'm going to show are just these basic slab built handles. These are other handles I've made in the past. Fairly similar. They're really basic. I show like basically two kinds. The first one I'm going to show is that one where it's just a basic strap, and there's just a couple little techniques that I think are important to think about. So what I like to do is just draw straight lines on my slab. And things I'm thinking about, like these are about the most basic handles. You want to make sure that they're longer than you think you need, because we're going to cut them so that they spring up and away from the mug. And we're going to lose a little bit of clay when we do that. So basically just cut that out, okay? So this is about, I'd say almost 3/8 of an inch thick, about 5/16 thick of a handle of a slab, right? Now, if I were to just go ahead and bend this and put this on the side of the cup, do you think it's going to be a very comfortable handle to use? What about this makes you think that?
Edges are really sharp.
The edges are really sharp. Okay, so that's why I have this newspaper. It's older newspaper, so it's a little crunchy. Fresh, soft newspaper is best, but I don't think they've started making the student paper lately. So what I do is just press it in between the newspaper, and I roll the edges of this just like so. So I'm just applying pressure here on the top corners, okay? And I'm gonna flip that over. So you can see it looks like that, nice soft edge. So why would I use the newspaper instead of just like using my finger? Any ideas why the newspaper helps? There's no drag on it, yep. That's one reason. What else? What else does the newspaper provide? I heard curve. Yeah, so the paper creates this like surface area, right, of a curve that my finger would not do because my finger is soft, you know, flesh, right? So it's not going to create that natural curve. So the paper has like a very specific, you know, planar quality. So if I press on it, it's going to create that curve. I can flatten it a little bit more. And so I come out with having a handle about like that. Right? So the second side that I apply that pressure to and smooth out, that's actually going to be the side that typically is a little rounder because I'm pressing down on the clay, right? So it's going to push down on the bottom part that I just flipped over, right? So that's the side I usually like to put on the inside of my handles because it's a little bit more curved, so it's going to fit my handle a little bit better, okay? So it's starting to stiffen up, which is great, but I need to curve it to match, you know, the form that I like. So I just start to like bend it slowly. If you bend this too fast, you're gonna get a lot of cracking. So one thing I like to do is just kind of go slow with it and do it like in increments, right? And I can use just one of my ribs here to smooth over any of those cracks. And I feel like, am I gonna make a 2-finger handle? Am I gonna make a 3-finger handle? 1 finger, like, you know, whatever the scale of the cup will kind of like dictate that. I have to think about like where it's gonna go on the cup, right? Am I gonna attach it near the top? Am I gonna attach it near the bottom? So I typically, with these, you know, this is a nice 2-finger handle size cup. The bigger one, you notice that the handle's larger on it as well, right? So that I can fit 3 fingers in. It's much more comfortable. So with this cup size, I can probably get by with like a 2-finger because I gotta remember these will shrink down, right? This clay shrinks about 12%. So I'm gonna just bend it now around my fingers. And I'm gonna leave a little bit of space because when these shrink down, so will this, right? This is gonna cinch down a little bit, and that gap between the handle and the cup is also gonna shrink, so you never want them to be too close or too tight, because you won't be able to get your fingers in. I'm just gonna basically pour like this. And I'm gonna cut this off. Where did I put? So what I also like to do is, since you guys have 5 of these due, you know, I would make like 2 or 3 at a time, okay? You know, I'm only gonna grade like 5 of them, so that shouldn't stop you from making like 8 if you like, you know? I'll grade your best 5, not your first 5. Does that make sense? So, you know, make several. I know it's easy for me to say, but so you're like, I can only make 2. But yeah, so I'm gonna work on something kind of like this. So like if I'm gonna attach that. This is pretty soft, I have to be very ginger with it, right? Think about like where I'm attaching it, you know, does this make sense? I kind of do like that. I like it where it starts to meet the cup at this like lower area, right, where that line meets. It's just been kind of successful design for me in the past. So if I do something kind of like that. But what do you think of that space between the cup and the handle? Is that good? Is that a good amount of space? Too much? Too little? Too much. Way too much. One thing that you'll want to avoid is like making these handles where the handle comes all the way out here. Okay. Now there's artful ways of doing it. And I think that's like great if you want to like go that route. But if you want a really functional mug, you want one that you actually have control over. And if you're trying to drink out of something and you're holding your handle like out here, you know, it's not very easy to drink out of, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so be careful about that. So I'm gonna cut this down a little bit. I'm gonna take off a 1/4 of an inch. And I'm cutting it at a little bit of a bevel, so that way it matches the form of the cup. Okay, so you can see I've got this angle happening down here, very similar angle up here. So I cut the handle out on a bevel so those match up. getting close. It's getting closer. So that's about right. I'm gonna take a little bit more off to account for the curvature of the cup, right? So I've got this at about the right angle. Now what I wanna do is, you guys should all have these fettling knives. I'm gonna cut this at a little bit of a curvature, but on the same bevel. So just come in. Notice I'm holding this kind of firmly between my thumb and my forefinger. You could also do this where you're like kind of setting it on the table like this. This is one way a lot of potters like to do this. So the reason why I want to cut it for the to account for the curvature of the cup. Any ideas why I want to do that? I want to maximize something. What would I want to maximize? Surface. Yeah, I want to make sure that this is like as much contact between the handle and the cup as possible, because remember, we're going to fire these to around 2,340 degrees. Now, if you fire anything to that temperature, it's going to really stress it out, right? It's going to really stress out that material inside the kiln. And so one thing you want to do is make sure that you have as much contact in between any of your appendages as possible, okay? So that's why I'm also going to use slip between. So, okay, what I like to do is place it on the cup, see where it goes, okay? Make sure it's right. Okay, I'm happy with that. You know, it's good. Okay, it's not too far away. And then I'm gonna mark on here. Pull this off, and I'm gonna score that area, and I just cross hatch. Okay. Just that area, you gotta rough that up. This also helps maximize the surface area. And there for YouTube land, all 3 of our subscribers. So cross hatch on here, cross hatch your handle. And then while I was throwing these cups, I had a little container sitting next to me, and I would just clean off my hand. All that slurry that accumulates on your hand, that's like the best slip, okay? It's even coming from the same mugs that you're creating, right? So it's gonna be the best stuff for us. So I just accumulated some of that in this little cup, and I'm gonna take a little bit, and I'm gonna paint this essentially onto that area, right? So this really helps kind of like fill in and soften. It helps fill in like all the little holes essentially that we're kind of creating with the cross hatching, the scoring. But also like softens up the clay where you're joining that, right? And we need that clay to join together really well. So that kind of like helps just prepare both those spots, both those areas. So I'm holding this kind of, very gingerly and firmly at the same time. I'm gonna press down on here, make sure it's really snug. And I wiggle this back and forth. I'm wiggling it to make sure I'm working out any air pockets, because again, I don't want to trap any air in between, right? So I'm working that back and forth and really push that. It's all about compression. One of the things that I see a lot from beginners, especially when they're making handles, I'll see a crack oftentimes up here at the top, sometimes at the bottom, and it's because it didn't compress that handle and push it onto the cup very well. So it's still pretty soft now. It's like this. I'm gonna take the round end of this and really press that in, okay? Really compress that and join those parts together. Because again, when we're firing these pieces so hot, it really stresses things out. The clay, the handle itself is gonna dry at a slightly different rate than the cup. So if the handle is really wet and your cup is really dry, do you think that's gonna be a very successful marriage? No. Successful marriage. It's like family counseling in mug shape. Yeah, the handle's going to totally crack off. So if you throw some cups and you leave them uncovered for a couple days, your cup's gonna be way too dry to add a handle to it. Okay, so make sure that you don't let them sit out uncovered for too long. Now I've just got these little areas that I've compressed. I'm gonna take some fresh, soft clay, fresh from the bag. I'll just roll out a little foil. Sometimes I'll just wet this down a little bit, just to get a little water on there. And then I'll add the coil. If I'm really neat about it, I don't need to compress that too much. As you can kind of see with these handles, the series that I did the same thing with these. This is porcelain. I didn't smooth out the part where it touches the handle, just the part where it touches the cup, right? So you can leave it something like that and you can kind of be, you know, kind of have a little bit of fun with it. But I'm gonna smooth this out. I'm just using my thumb. And really, you know, I think it's good to like bolster that seam and smooth that out and make sure that those are joined together really well. But compression is really a big part of it. You know, if I see cracking, it's from like two things. It wasn't compressed enough, or the cup was probably too dry before you added the handle, okay? So don't let these get too dry. So that's a basic one. I'll just show you another one I like to make real quick. I'll show you the form. I'm not gonna attach it though. One other form I like to make is just what's called a whale tail. I'm gonna draw this onto my slab of clay here. I can show you some other designs. There's also like a band-aid design I like to make. I'll show you those real quick. Okay, so I call this a whale tail because it looks like a whale tail, right? This is kind of like a band-aid, or a butterfly clip, butterfly band-aid. So I'll show you how this kind of works. I would soften these edges as well. I did it really fast, so it's not the best of angles. But something kind of like this. It's a really big tail. Take a little bit off the top of that. And something kind of like this. You know, I would curve it to the cup. Okay. So let's use the other side of this one. Right. And cut it to length. Alright. So that's just like a whale tail. You can make other shapes that you like, you know. Just kind of experiment a little bit. Right? So that's the basics of slab belt handles. Okay?